I can still feel it, yeah. In my head. I call it, even though I know it's her. She's got inside my damn head and won't stop laughing. She got in there and won't shut up. I'm sorry. I can be calm. First I thought God was answering my prayers. It said it wanted to get to know me, and I'd been so lonely. It started telling me things about myself I'd forgotten. It knew every part of me. It felt nice, I guess, for someone to take an interest. But then it started using my brain against me. It started telling me what I was going to do before I did it. It started telling me that if I didn't dance to its tune, I'd never be free of it. I didn't want to be alone, but I didn't like where this was going. That's why I took a drill to my head. The thing is, and listen, I'm not crazy. I know crazy, and I know I look crazy, but I'm not. What I was dealing with was someone projecting her mind into mine and picking me apart when I was at my most vulnerable. I still don't know why she did it other than for some cheap thrills and the combination of my company's safe, but now I'm left with the memory of that intrusion. And I'm convinced the only way I can stop it is by killing the woman responsible. That's why I was recruited by the government. All I have to go on is one word: asylum. But I won't stop until her laughing does. Good evening, Kindred. Tonight we are going to discuss one of the more violating disciplines, one of the more disgusting aspects of Vampire the Masquerade, and some may even consider it mundane, normal compared to some of the other more blatant gifts, but it really is the slow, dull, trespassing powers that cause more of an impact. Potence hurts, vicissitude warps, but Auspex has a way of weaseling into your mind, into the very core of yourself, making you doubt who you are, what you're capable of. Tonight we journey into mental violations. So get comfortable, pour your glass of something red, and let's discuss Auspex in a detailed light that may make you more uncomfortable than most other disciplines. Whether you call it voyeurism, scrying, or anima vicis, it all does the same thing. It unlocks the hidden knowledge that lies within not only yourself and the world around you, but those around you. Auspex tends to get to the meat of the untangible, to open portals into the minds of others. Auspex in the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade is a touchy subject for me. I know I go into great detail on this subject quite often in my videos, regardless of whether or not we're covering it directly, but since beyond the time that I started playing Vampire the Masquerade, Clan Tzimisce had been wielding Auspex, and now they don't, and that's strange to me. I'm not completely against it. I'll completely admit that the discipline that I ignored the most in my play as most Tzimisce that I've portrayed was Auspex, primarily because animalism was satisfying, vicissitude was necessary, thaumaturgy was inviting, and the other disciplines that I was able to gather under my disposal were just fun, and also not expected in my arsenal most of the time. But I've read that Tzimisce, when they fight, they do it on the astral plane in a psychic projection sort of fashion. Aura versus aura. Fighting against the silver cords that connect them to the mortal realms. Trying to make the other lost in the spirit world. In where that does make a shamanistic amount of sense. And I've studied small amounts of Slavic witchcraft and sorcery due to my enjoyment of the clan and also some personal pursuits. But Auspex is a specialized power that I don't think fit Clan Tzimisce as well as I thought in the past. Originally, my thoughts on Auspex were simply the Tzimisce have it because the book says so. But with the way that I think of the concept of Old Clan Tzimisce now, and if you are unfamiliar, the Old Clan Tzimisce, where the standard portrayal of the clan had originally animalism, Auspex, and vicissitude. The Old Clan practiced Auspex, animalism, Auspex, and dominate, washing their hands of the protean powers of vicissitude, because they found it vulgar and unclean. Nowadays, or in these nights I should probably say, the Old Clan Tzimisce can be created using predator types. And the idea of a Old Clan Tzimisce now being recognizable through the powers of Auspex makes a lot more sense than it ever did just with Dominate. But what does the book, what does Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition say about Auspex? Among the greatest gifts and worst curses afflicting vampires, the discipline of Auspex allows kindred to discern truth from lies, probe the minds of those around them, and perceive reality on a different level than any other beings. What appears to be the ultimate power in foresight and vision grants its wielder perhaps too much knowledge. They may detect an assassin's blade before it strikes, or get into an enemy's head to turn them around, but they can also sense every shift in emotion, good and bad, see things they wish they had not, and discern futures they may not wish to explore. Users of Auspex invite paranoia, but using it is addictive. Once you know the truth rests in your grasp, you seek it out at every opportunity. Kindred use Auspex in many ways. Some vampires act as spies for their courts or factions. Others act on their own, blackmailing mortals and immortals with secrets gleaned from the quiet conversations, subtle emotional shifts, and telepathic intrusions. Auspex allows its users to play the role of domain detective, studying the scene of a vampire's destruction for telltale spiritual clues, or interrogating suspects with unnatural accuracy. I love the concept of the discipline being addictive. That's not something that's explored very often. We just accept that they have powers, but we don't accept how truly addictive those powers can really be. I know one of my first thoughts when reading through Auspex was the idea of a kindred who's recently embraced, who has access to heightened senses. And whenever it rains, they have the urge to run outside, strip off all their clothes, and just sit with their eyes closed and feel everything on a whole new level. Feel the water hitting their skin. Smell the earth around them become moist. listen to the sound of the thundering raindrops striking the ground, taste the cool air on your tongue. That kind of thing can get addictive. Just the sensory overload on that one. But as you go further into the thing, as you go further into the discipline, other things can become addictive as well. The going on 5th edition, the sense the unseen, being able to see the world in a whole nother way, truly seeing a whole new world around you, can lead to so many issues. Just walking around with sense the unseen could kill you. It could truly kill you. Not only would things that don't want to be noticed, and now you have a target on your head because of that, but you could become distracted by the netherworlds and not actually pay attention to what's going on around you, leading you to walk out in front of a bus or something similar. Premonition is the need to know the future at all times. That can become addictive. That itself, you have the powers of a god, but not the ability to rein them in, to understand when you should use them and when you should not. And it just keeps going on and on and on. When you meet a new person, needing to know exactly what their aura is going through when coming into contact with you, or somebody that you've known forever and you've never truly understood what their pure thoughts are, because we can never understand each other's pure thoughts. But now you're reading their emotions. Now you're getting into the point where you're starting to divine the colors and fluctuations of someone's actual inner thought process and emotional connections. You would start distrusting every word anyone ever came to you. That will lead to paranoia. The characteristics labeled in Auspex are put forth as more of a storyteller warning than anything else. Storytellers may wish to make Auspex rolls for characters in order to more convincingly provide wrong or incomplete answers after failed rolls. Not allowing the player to know whether they passed or failed on an Auspex roll makes a lot of sense, due to the fact that we don't know when we screw things up a good amount of the time until we receive repercussions for those actions. And the fact that it's encouraged that carries over to game is respectable. Auspex is a mental type discipline. The masquerade threat is low. Auspex never by itself manifests in a way visible to the naked eye or causes effects that can't be rationalized, if only as dumb luck. Blood resonance, phlegmatic, artists, especially photographers, and visionaries, certain schizophrenics, users of psychoactive substances, detectives. Those individuals who usually have a tendency of noticing what goes unnoticed. A detective is a great example on that one, due to the fact that detectives are specifically trained to notice the unnoticeable. Individuals like photographers, as it said, or artists who need to capture the very essence of something to continue their craft. But the idea of individuals on psychedelic substances is also a very fun. Not too long ago, I read an article on how it is a belief that the development of the human mind came from certain psychedelic drugs that can be found in nature. Humans, early humans, and our ancestors devouring things that caused a psychoactive reaction in the brain, which actually forced us into a higher understanding of things. So the fact that it can affect Auspex in that way is highly entertaining to me. this is another example of why Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition has come to a new level of roleplay. The focusing in on what a vampire eats being important is something that I've always put into my games. Given an example, in the old system, there were the 8 cardinal disciplines, which are reflected into what the disciplines are nowadays. And even if you read the Book of Nod, it states that Cain learned Protean. But the other disciplines do tend to have more of an interesting... It almost seems like the disciplines themselves need a backstory of how they came about. And in my old games, we ended up doing that. Primarily because I wanted to have some fun stuff involved in my plots that could open up a gateway of creating your own disciplines over time. An example of this is the certain aspects of noumena, or human energy and magic. But I had created these stones that basically held time still. Using those stones, which I threw into Fey plot lines and things like that that were involving using other types of supernaturals as antagonists. The vampires of early generations had taken those stones, ground them up, force-fed them to humans, and fed off them, which eventually created Temporis. These temporal stones created Temporis. The ability to wield obtenebration came from the cloak that Lilith had given Lucifer in Revelations of the Dark Mother. So these kind of things were all intertwined and explained where certain gifts came from. And with the way that they're handling resonance and needing to feed on certain types of people to increase disciplines, it really does add a level of lore and life to the world of Vampire, and not just, oh, these are what vampires have. And I greatly respect that. So, going in to the disciplines themselves. Level 1. We have heightened senses. The vampire's senses sharpen to a preternatural degree. Heightened senses. The vampire's senses sharpen to a preternatural degree, giving them the ability to see in pitch darkness, hear ultrasonic frequencies, and smell the fear of cowering prey. That is a very good way of describing that, to be able to see in situations where most people can't, where they'd be able to hear things and smell things, but it does leave out the other senses, which is very, very sad, because it does tend to get a little bit more detailed than that, because a sense of taste can help you to notice certain additives to the blood that you may be looking for or trying to avoid. Just the sense of feeling also is a very important thing. Reading on a blank sheet of paper what somebody had written on the sheet of paper prior to that, just by tracing over the indents with your fingers, trying to make it out. There's so many uses for heightened senses, and I think most people do tend to, at least most people that I've story told for, or even people who have story told for me, who I've confused the hell out of. The heightened senses is so much more than just smell, sight, and sound. The cost is free, but see below. So I guess that does come with a caveat. Dice pool is wits plus resolve, and the system. The user adds their Auspex rating to all perception rolls. If exposed to extreme sensations, such as loud bangs, flashes of intense light, or overpowering smells while the power is active, the user must succeed in a wits plus resolve difficulty of 3 or more. Roll to dampen their senses in time, or the overload causes them to sustain -3 dice penalty to all perception-based rolls for the rest of the scene. I like that a lot because that always came up in games that I had played in the past, and also games that I've done. Also games that I've run myself. Flashbang grenades are a person's worst enemy, especially if you have Auspex active. I do enjoy the fact that they did incorporate smell into that as being overwhelmed. Duration. Until deactivated. Having the power active for longer stretches of time without rest, more than a scene, especially for a high stimulus environment, might necessitate spending willpower at the storyteller's discretion. I can see that. Just having a player go, oh, it's always active, is not something that I would ever accept. Primarily because eventually you're going to become accustomed to it. I'm not saying that it's not possible that a vampire can't just go, this is my life, and I'm always going to see everything, and I'm always going to smell everything. But there are going to be things. Cars backfire. High beams suddenly come on without warning. Auspex can be dangerous to the user, and I do think anyone with common sense would not be walking around with that superpower active all of the time. Sense the unseen. The senses of the vampire become attuned to dimensions beyond the mundane, allowing them to sense presences otherwise hidden from the naked eye. This can be anything from another vampire using Obfuscate to someone using Auspex to spy upon the character, to a ghost in the middle of the room. Dormant blood sorcery spells and rituals might also be found with this power, at storyteller discretion. I don't see why they would not allow that, truthfully, when it comes to dormant blood sorcery. Thaumaturgy has gotten such a huge get-out-of-jail-free card for 2 decades now that it's nice to see that not only has it been taken down a peg to make it more playable, but also a little easier for people to detect. The cost is free. The dice pool is Wits plus Auspex or Resolve plus Auspex. The system. Whenever there's something supernatural hiding in plain sight, the storyteller makes a hidden roll of Wits plus Auspex against the difficulty they choose. Against an entity actively trying to stay hidden, the storyteller can call for a blind roll. Example: Lisa, roll 7 dice for me. As a contest against the target's relevant pool. For example, detecting a vampire using Obfuscate would be a roll of Wits plus Auspex versus Wits plus Obfuscate. If the vampire actively searches for a hidden supernatural entity, they roll Resolve plus Auspex similarly. So, I do enjoy that also. I tend to favor awareness checks in my game. So Wits plus awareness is a very common thing that is called out. To the point where I get made fun of. Because I've run games where we've gone weeks with nothing but awareness checks. Because I like to let the roleplay handle things most of the time. But being able to determine whether or not you're looking for something specifically, or whether or not you just notice it, is a major, major thing that most people don't understand that those are two different skill sets. Being able to use wits plus Auspex means that you are just supernaturally aware. It's always active. It's always going to be usable on things like that. And in most games, and I can tell you right now, the Chronicle that I'm currently running right now, most of my kindred do not have access to this type of power. So they are running primarily on wits plus awareness, being able to just notice things. But to be able to do wits plus Auspex is on a different level. You are not going, oh, there's a hidden feature in this painting or this work of art that I didn't notice before, or that is a telltale sign of something that's going on. Being able to do wits plus Auspex reveals more of, there's a spirit hiding in this room who might have answers to questions that you possibly have. Duration passive. Again, sense the unseen can be used willingly, but it is something that tends to be activated. You more or less have to not acknowledge what's going on around you to be able to pass a standard existence. Now we're on level 2, premonition. Premonition. The vampire experiences flashes of insight. These may take the form of raised hackles, sudden inspiration, or even vivid visions. While never too precise, these visions can nudge the vampire out of harm's way, or even a truth previously overlooked. This is a very interesting discipline because I believe this was an elder level in past editions. But the idea that your extrasensory perception has climbed to the level that you are going to notice things before most people does seem like something that should be in the lower levels of Auspex. This actually works very well in comparison to the old danger sense merit. And a lot of storytellers do need to be on the lookout for this discipline, as well as most aspects of Auspex. This is a very passive, mental, acute discipline. And as a storyteller, all I can say is if you do have a vampire with Auspex, you need to be on your guard. This is a good example on why every storyteller should at least have a condensed version of every player's character sheet in front of them at all times. And whenever a character is doing anything, you need to flip to it to make sure that you don't ruin the game for them. This is an ST's responsibility, but also the responsibility of the player to remind the ST so that you can continue having a good time. The cost for premonition is free or 1 rouse check if you activate it yourself. Dice pool, resolve plus Auspex. The system. Whenever the storyteller deems it appropriate, this power gives the character a sudden hint that aids them in some way, letting them find a clue they've missed or saving them from danger. Whether it gives the character a sudden vision of themselves walking into a trap, an inviting red glow over a second right turn during a chase, or a brief flash of a skeleton beneath the floorboards of the prince's office. This power always gives the storyteller license to subtly speed up play or move the story into a desired track. The suggested limit is 1 premonition per scene, even if more than one character has premonition. The user can also actively provoke a premonition by focusing on a subject. making a rouse check and rolling resolve plus Auspex. The number of successes rolled determines the level of insight on the subject, if any. Duration, passive. I do enjoy the fact that it's something that just naturally happens to the vampire who has access to this gift, but it's one of those things where you can make it happen. I'm used to disciplines being one way or the other, and it's so nice to see something that's got that much detail into it that you may be so used to walking into a room and being able to just know things like this, that being able to force it to happen is also a very good thing. Now, I am not a huge fan of the Twilight Saga. Most individuals who play Vampire the Masquerade that I've encountered are not. But what I do have to say, what is considered to be one of the biggest cop-outs in the movie franchise is the end scene of the last movie. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen it and actually want to. I didn't care for it. Although I do understand that they are loosely, from what I understand, they are loosely based off the Vampire the Masquerade franchise. And you can actually see where specific clans do fit into place if you decide to watch it. I probably won't watch it again. But the last scene is this massive epic fight involving all the characters from their werewolves, which aren't even really werewolves. They're more just like shapeshifters who have been doing it for so long that they forgot they weren't werewolves. And the vampires involved. Then, after everybody dies, on both sides, a whole bunch of people die, it all turns out to be the premonition of one of the characters involved in the fight. And then they are able to diplomatically discuss why it's a bad idea to get into the fight and completely avoid it in the outcome of the movie. Which again sounds like a huge, cheap move. However, how much fun would it be to start a game session off with a massively powered NPC or group of NPCs who are just tear-assing through the player characters, and then kill the character that has premonition last, and then have them wake up. The idea that you can give them that much of a fright and only have one player character actually know what the hell is going on with it, it does give you some interesting things to play with. Then there is also the movie Premonition itself with Sandra Bullock. The idea that the person does not know that they're having premonitions throughout a period of time, where they're getting to live through the same part of a chronicle over and over again, without, I don't want to say without consequences, but being able to preempt things, and just driving them insane over and over again. That's a lot of fun, and I highly suggest people doing things like that, because it's just fun. It's just something that you can do to screw with people, and if you're not screwing with people, why are you a storyteller? Right? That's what we like to do. We're not there to kill them, we're not there to make their time miserable, but we are there to entertain ourselves as well as them, right? So, we get to move on to the next level 2, which is Scry the Soul, which in older editions of this game used to be known as Aura Perception. By focusing on a person, the vampire can perceive the state of that person's psyche as a shifting aura of colors. Auras reveal little precise information, but do provide clues regarding many subjects: emotional states, resonance, and supernatural traits. If looking for a specific condition, the vampire can cursorily scan the crowd to detect it. Such cursory scans provide no further information. I've always been a fan of tabletop Auspex over LARP Auspex, and I am a LARPer. I've just never enjoyed the whole yes or no questions situation. It always defaults to, are you lying? Which is bullshit. I do not like that because so many people have different reactions when it comes to lying. And it can be hard to recognize such things. Being able to see a swirling, switching array of colors and fluctuations makes so much more sense than just being able to ask yes or no questions. Also, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure in the older systems, scanning a crowd was not allowed. But I do like the fact that it can be. And also keep in mind that much like heightened senses, scanning a crowd's auras could be very overwhelming. The cost is 1 rouse check. The dice pool is intelligence plus Auspex versus composure plus subterfuge. The system. Make an intelligence plus Auspex versus composure plus stealth roll. On a win, the storyteller truthfully answers a number of questions equal to the margin of the roll about the target's aura and psyche, including the emotional state of the subject, the resonance in the subject's blood, whether the subject is a vampire, werewolf, ghoul, or any other supernatural being, whether the subject is under the influence of blood sorcery or other magic, whether the subject has committed diablerie in the last year. A critical win allows discovery of something unexpected, as determined by the storyteller. If scanning a crowd, roll versus the difficulty determined by the size of the crowd and external distractions, as well as the type of trait being sought. Finding the vampire in the living room might only be a difficulty of 3, while finding the most nervous person in a crowded rave is most likely a difficulty of 6 or higher. Duration, 1 turn, or storyteller's discretion. I don't see it going past 1 turn, but I do have to say that the system has given some very interesting thoughts, at least to me, when it comes to uses of aura perception, especially with the idea of scanning the crowd. Being in a nightclub and trying to identify one individual could be a very overwhelming thing, especially since you are going to be dealing with such a mixed match of resonances all over the place. Individuals on drugs are going to have certain things. Individuals who have been drinking a lot of alcohol that are depressants are going to be doing things. Individuals who are just there to get laid are going to release such a flood of emotions in the place. And then there's those people who just want to have a good time and want to be left alone, who are going to have a completely different outlook on things and also a different resonance. So having those be present in Scry the Soul for this game is a very interesting additive that is going to add a lot of meat to a story. Share the senses. By reaching out with their mind, the vampire can tap into the senses of another mortal or vampire, seeing, hearing, or feeling what they do. The user still retains their own perceptions and is still aware of their own surroundings, though the effect requires some getting used to. The user decides whether to tap into only one, some, or all of the target's senses. When used on a stranger, the target requires line of sight to initiate. However, it can be used over longer distances by someone who still has some of the user's blood in their body. That is very interesting, especially for individuals who have become addicted to human sensation. And again, this is another one of those aspects of Auspex that could be considered a drug, and something that could very well be the backbone of an entire chronicle of vampires getting used to their powers. being able to put yourself into the mind of an individual who is going through specific emotional sways or who are going through physical sensations could be something I can see vampires going, well, I can't live as a human anymore, but I can still experience those sensations. This seems to me to be a severe trap for Clan Toreador. I don't think I could play a vampire within Clan Toreador without taking this discipline, simply for the ability to re-experience carnal pleasures again on a different level. You might be able to go through the physical motions of things, but most vampires are not actually going to experience them the right way without a high enough humanity. But with the concept of an addictive discipline, your humanity is going to erode as your sensual enjoyment is going to rise. So I would like to know anybody else's thoughts on using Share the Senses. Because where, yes, you can use this for spying, but I can really see this being addictive in a what to do to your herd. I could actually, given how amazing the kiss itself is supposed to feel, I can imagine vampires who would use this on people that they are feeding at the moment, so they themselves can feel that sensation of being fed upon. And I understand that adds a whole level of paradox to this, but vampires are crazy. Let's just put it out that way. They are predators, they are beasts of sensation, and they are going to take advantage of everything that they can have, which is why these disciplines become so addictive. Cost: 1 rouse check. Dice pool: Resolve plus Auspex. System: roll Resolve plus Auspex at a difficulty of 3. This difficulty can go up depending on distraction, distance, and other factors, such as an amount of the user's blood that remains in the target. The target usually remains unaware of the intrusion, but since the unseen can allow the passenger to be noticed. To get rid of the unwanted rider, the victim must beat the intruder in a wits plus resolve versus wits plus resolve roll. An Auspex user thrown out this way cannot make another sharing attempt until the next night. Duration: 1 scene. I wonder what the World of Darkness writers imagine when they think of someone with unseen presence can notice this. Do they just notice overlapping auras? Do they see a vision of the individual who's using the gift over the target? That holds my interest. Level 4: Spirit's Touch. By touching an inanimate object or the ground at a location, the vampire can sense the emotional residue left by those who have handled the object or visited the location in the past. The user gains insight into not only that person, but also what was done and under what circumstances. While rarely crystal clear, the information often provides leads impossible to gain from forensics and deduction. Spirit's Touch is one of those gifts that just is fun to incorporate into a chronicle. I can see myself using Spirit's Touch nonstop, just because I have a need to know the history of things. So I can see why a vampire would want to use that discipline quite often. This is also one of the few disciplines that actually stands out in my memory of being used in the old television show Kindred the Embraced. Although I don't really think it was used to its highest potential, but what can you expect from an early 90s Fox series based on a show where they refused to take the creator's insight into consideration? Cost: 1 rouse check. Dice pool: Intelligence plus Auspex. System: make an Intelligence plus Auspex roll versus the difficulty depending on the information sought. Gleaning the emotional state of the user of a murder weapon used a few days before is a difficulty of 3. But sensing their surroundings, in which a 300-year-old letter was written, approaches difficulty of 6 or higher. Each point of margin on the roll allows the user to sense roughly one additional previous handler and set of circumstances, counting backwards from the most recent. Duration, 1 turn. I do like how it does tend to have a degrading effect, but the higher your ability in this, the better. You're going to gain more information. The more points you have in Auspex, or the more points you have in intelligence. And this is actually a good example of where wits is noticing something and intelligence is looking for something specific. Level 5, Clairvoyance. By closing their eyes and entering a light trance, the vampire becomes master of its surroundings. In a few minutes, it can gather information from roughly a city block-sized area, more if outdoors or less populated. That would normally take many hours, perhaps days of legwork and investigation. Once connected in such a way to their surroundings, the vampire can also receive information on anything happening out of the ordinary in the area. This would be a power that is so detrimental to have if you were a prince or a member of your prince's security, but also a power that any prince should realize that anyone could have. It kind of reminds me yet again of the Way of Spirit Khaldoonism, but on a lower level. I do enjoy the fact that it is an area effect, several blocks. I'm not really sure how the storyteller is going to answer to that, but I'm sure that will be covered in the system. Cost, 1 rouse check. Dice pool, intelligence plus Auspex, because you are specifically looking for a thing. System. Roll intelligence plus Auspex against the difficulty based on the security and level of activity of the area. Using clairvoyance on one's own mansion would be a difficulty of 3, while an unfamiliar city block in the slum of a major city would amount to a 7 or more. The user adds their base haven rating and extra dice to the pool when using clairvoyance on their own home. The storyteller answers the vampire's questions about the comings and goings in the area, what people have seen and heard, topics of local gossip, recent major shocks or impressions, and so forth. The player can ask roughly 1 question per point of margin. Answers about deliberately concealed information might consume more than 1 point. A critical win reveals something major regardless of the question asked, assuming there is something to reveal. The vampire can also clairvoyantly monitor events in progress, though this requires them to remain in the area for as long as the effect is active. Duration, a few minutes for information gathering, up to a night for vigilance. I would be terrified to play in a game with a storyteller who completely grasped all the rules for the way this discipline works, because I do not see one sheriff not having at least a hound or deputy, whatever you want to call them, with this ability. I don't see a sheriff not doing what he can to learn this ability himself, because this right here is how you start a major information network gathering scheme. This is how you own territory. Possession. Amalgam. Dominate 3. With this power, the vampire can strip the will of a mortal and completely possess their body, using it as their own, while the mind of the subject remains hidden to the vampire. They can do anything and go anywhere the subject could while the power remains active. Using this, the vampire can even experience the sunlight, food, and physical sexuality long denied them, their host paying the price for whatever abuse the vampire wreaks on their body while riding it. I do like the fact that this is an amalgam. The reason I do is because in the old system it was not. This was just the possession used to be level 5 dominate. And making it level 5 dominate is not as harsh as it should be. Now, I would have to say, looking at the level 3 dominate out of curiosity, you have Forgetful Mind. You have Forgetful Mind. So, using basically the abilities that you've learned in Auspex up to this point and Forgetful Mind, you can now enter the soul of an individual. I think I would make this a little harsh. If I was writing it, and I'm not, I understand that, but I would say that you would need level 5 dominate to have this. And primarily because it allows you to walk in the sun. It's being able to walk in the sun is one of those things that just sticks in my craw, if you want to put it that way. You're playing a vampire. I would at least say that you're still going to have to throw not rouse checks, but you're still going to have to throw like frenzy checks to make sure that you don't freak out, because your inner self knows that the sun is bad for you. But it is a highly invasive discipline. And just imagine the things that you can get away with it. Now, it being a dominates plus Auspex power, you can imagine which clans have access to it. And at least on the regular. And most of these are going to be Malkavians. Now, if you are going by what I said with using prey exclusions, then the old clan Zemitzi could do this too. And that might be a thing from time to time, but I don't see that really being their style. They're more of, you're going to do what I'm going to tell you to do because you're going to do what I'm going to tell you to do. But I don't see most clans using possession on the regular as a power tactic. The Ventru, I could see using it, but I'm really glad they don't have standard access to this, because most Ventru are not going to have Auspex right away. Cost 2 rouse checks, as it should be, because this is a pretty fucked up discipline. Dice pool, Resolve plus Auspex versus Resolve plus Intelligence. System. This power can only be used on mortals. If the mortal is a ghoul, they must first be bloodbound to the user. Before possession can begin, the vampire must have eye contact with their victim. The user then engages in a Resolve plus Auspex versus Resolve plus Intelligence conflict with the victim in order to inhabit their body. If the vampire player rolls a total failure, the victim becomes immune to further possession attempts for the duration of the story. I like the fact that it does not say from the vampire. I like that it says just further. Just any further attempt is fucked. Storytellers really need to keep detailed information when it comes to their NPCs when it comes to this gift. Because I'm sure certain individuals in law enforcement or in higher political levels in a city would most likely have been possessed at one point in time. Once the vampire inhabits the body of their victim, their own body falls into a torpor-like trance, completely unaware of their surroundings and their own physical state, except for aggravated damage, which breaks the trance and ends the effect. A vampire possessing a mortal can use Auspex Presence and dominate through them. If the user wishes to extend possession into daytime, they must make a roll to stay awake. Failure to stay awake ends the power. Any aggravated damage to the subject also risks ending the possession. The user must succeed at a Resolve plus Auspex roll, difficulty of 2 plus the damage taken, to stay in control. If the subject dies during possession, the resulting spiritual trauma immediately causes the user to sustain 3 levels of aggravated damage to their willpower. This power does not give the user the ability to read the mind, use the skills, or emulate the manners of the victim. Any skills employed use the possessing vampire's ratings. The user must make a manipulation plus performance versus a wits plus insights roll to successfully impersonate the victim's manners, expressions, and the like. Finally, possession violates the victim even more profoundly than a blood bond. A storyteller should consider awarding stains for this action. Duration until ended, voluntarily or involuntarily. That is fun. The sheer potential that possession offers is worth the risk. I have to say that. Not to mention that it's so much easier to make sure that you yourself are protected than Sussum the Spirit animalism. Because with that, you need to make sure that your body is well taken care of before you activate the power and have access to letting the animal that you are possessing leave the area. But with this one, you can just make sure that your body is well taken care of before you leave it at that point. Hell, put yourself in the trunk of your car, you know? Just there's ways of handling this. And the other level 5 is telepathy. Telepathy, I believe, used to be a level 3 power. I'm very interested in the fact that they switched this to a level 5. From a storyteller standpoint, because I've had players who have abused this power to a degree that is just ridiculous. At the highest levels of Auspex, the vampire can now literally read minds, as well as project their own thoughts into the minds of others. While reading a mortal's mind is relatively straightforward, undead minds require a higher effort to penetrate. I've always enjoyed the fact that they do signify that a vampire mind is harder to get into than a normal human. Cost: 1 rouse check, plus 1 willpower versus non-consenting vampire's willpower. Dice pool: resolve plus Auspex versus wits plus subterfuge. System: the user is not required to roll any dice to project their thoughts to another, vampire or mortal, though they do require line of sight. To read the mind of a mortal within line of sight, roll resolve plus Auspex versus wits plus subterfuge while looking into their eyes, unless the mortal consents, in which no roll is required. A win means that the user can discern surface thoughts as a stream of images. With higher margin, allows the user to probe for more distant and buried memories. A critical win gives a coherent picture of the subject's current thoughts and intentions. To read the mind of a non-consenting vampire, spend 1 willpower point before rolling. Duration: roughly 1 minute per rouse check, increased to a full scene on consenting subjects. Telepathy is just one of those messy disciplines that seems like it should be so easy. I do believe that the World of Darkness crew has given us a good coherent rule set. I hated telepathy in V20, and I've never been quiet about that. Anytime it's been used, I'm just like, fucking players. Let's be honest, fucking Matt. If my friend Matt Hart is watching this, fucking Matt, I hated it at every moment of his use of telepathy, and he was good at it. I'm not saying he wasn't, but it was such a pain in the ass. But I do think the rules that they've created for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition they're a lot more coherent, and they're a lot easier to use and work in with a story. So good on them for that. And that is our prime look at Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition Auspex. However, it does continue on in the Vampire the Masquerade Companion, where we have Auspex Level 2, Obeya, which is an amalgam of Fortitude 1. The vampire soothes the mental and emotional turmoil of their subject, restoring to them a modicum of steadfastness. It is especially effective when used on mortals, either to help them through momentary agitation or to calm them before feeding on them. I gotta say, I love the fact that the Salubri don't have to ask permission to feed anymore. But this level, Obeya, as it is called, stops people from being able to deal with their shit. Which means you are causing momentary and immediate relief with a side effect of sociopath. I love the fact that the Salubri are not just well-intentioned angels who happen to be cursed any longer. They are monsters, and I'm glad that they're being represented as monsters, regardless of their intentions. Cost: 1 rouse check and additional willpower depending on the circumstances. The dice pool is Composure plus Auspex. System: the vampire rolls Composure plus Auspex against a difficulty of 2. And restores a number of superficial willpower damage levels equal to the margin of the roll. Alternatively, the user restores 1 aggravated willpower damage level for every 3 successes in the margin. If successfully used on a mortal, Obeya similarly calms them if they're in a turbulent emotional state, or puts them otherwise at ease. Use of this power takes a whole turn. If the vampire spends an entire scene, instead, reduce the difficulty of Obeya to 0. Obeya must be used on someone other than a vampire invoking the power. The subject can be affected by the power only once per night. If the user soothes more than 1 subject per night, the user suffers superficial willpower damage equal to half the number of successes in the margin for every additional subject, as they take on the burden of so many charges. Duration not applicable. This version of Obeya is just so dark and gritty, and it does its best to seem so pure and light, but it's really not. And I really, really appreciate it. I just think that being able to access that kind of thing is so interesting. And I do have to say that this was Obeya, which is a level 2. Level 2 Fortitude amalgam is Valorin, and that's an amalgam of Auspex, but we will cover that under Fortitude, I think. Level 5. Unburden the Bestial Soul, Amalgam Dominate 3. Prerequisite, Obeya. As seekers of the promises of Golconda, some vampires explore ways to remedy the turbulent souls of their fellow damned. This power shares some amount of the vampire's moral serenity with a repentant kindred, allowing some semblance of remorse to be restored, while also keeping the beast at bay. It does require the user to take on part of the mind and spirit of their subject, shackling their will to that of the user. Most often seen among the Salubri, this power has no doubt contributed to their reputation as monstrous soul thieves. I can't help but picture a Salubri doing this for nefarious purposes. The ability of binding someone's soul directly to you to calm them down, kind of thing. Making them feel bad for the things that they've done. And I'm not saying that that is not a good thing, but it really all has to do with intention. It kind of reminds me of the Bali's Sense the Sin, in a way. Cost: 2 rouse checks. Gain 1 stain. Dice pool, Composure plus Auspex versus Humanity. So, the higher in Humanity it is, the harder it is for them to actually do this on the person. That makes a lot of sense, considering the fact that your moral high ground would just keep going higher and higher. System: the vampire spends a scene in seclusion with the subject and rolls Composure plus Auspex versus the Humanity of the subject. For every success in the margin, they can remove 1 stain from the subject or erect a psychological shield that will protect the subject from future stains on a 1-for-1 basis. For example, A margin of 3 applied to a subject with no stains would effectively cancel out up to 3 stains acquired later in the session. On a critical win, the user can choose to forego the above benefits, instead restoring a single point of humanity to the subject. But no vampire can gain that effect more than once ever. Unburdening the bestial soul works only on vampires and only on subjects whose humanity is lower than that of the user. No matter the benefits received, for the rest of the session, the subject is numbed, having part of their mind merged with that of the user, and any dominate powers used on them by this power's users succeeds automatically with no eye contact necessary. When the power expires, all psychological shields not used up are lost. Those stains removed or humanity gained on initial applications do not revert. Duration, 1 scene. Again, this is a power that could be used for such horrible purposes. The idea of being able to go up to a vampire and going, "Oh, you seem to have an issue. Let me fix it for you." Make them feel remorse, and then they are also your bitch for the rest of the night. That's pretty hefty. And again, this is Salubri. This is the good guys of Vampire the Masquerade. I want to play a bad Salubri now. I've always wanted to play a bad Salubri. The idea of playing a healer Infernalist has always been something that'd just be so much fun for me. But now I don't even feel the need to have Infernalist gifts or even be involved in Infernalist practices to play a Salubri who's just that fucked up in the head. That, my friends, is all that we have on the gifts of Auspex for the time being. Maybe in future supplements we'll get something to add to it. But until then, this is what we got to go with. I look very forward to hearing everybody's opinion on how Auspex works, how it should work if you disagree with it, and also what you like about it. What you like about it is something that I highly see as important. I want to know your opinion on Auspex and its new translation in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. That being said, I also have one other thing that I would like to say, and that is we have a name for our dear friend back here now. The viewer True Salubri Seraphil has suggested the name Dullahan, which is an Irish name which literally means one without a head. I did a little looking online and I found that that was an actual translation of it, and I find it incredibly hilarious due to the fact that he is specifically a head. So Dullahan is our companion when it comes to doing these videos, and after having him for as long as I have, I do have to say that I'm very pleased that he is named. So thank you, True Salubri. I do highly appreciate your suggestion. I am Voivode Maquette. This is our World of Darkness, and this has been an in-depth look at the discipline of Auspex, the most addictive of vampire disciplines. Thank you for joining me. Good evening.